Last summer, sleep kept us sane through the silence. This summer, you're going to need sleep to get over all of this. That's why it's the perfect time to upgrade to a Nectar mattress and get award-winning, precision-engineered sleep at incredible value. Prices start at just $499, and you get $399 in accessories thrown in, a 365-night home trial, and a forever warranty. Go to nectarsleep.com.
Every word the English language has ever offered to describe or reference femininity has started out with a neutral or positive meaning, and then at some point devolved into an insult, ultimately landing in a sexual slur. And this process where a word starts out meaning something positive or neutral and devolves to mean something negative is called pejoration. The opposite is called amelioration, when a word starts out meaning something negative and then evolves to mean something neutral or positive. And we see that process much more with words that reference masculinity.
This is the Radicals and Revolutionaries Lab. This is the show that asks, what does feminism look like? Where do these power bitches come from? And what drives their boundary-pushing work? Join us as we dive into feminist awakenings and the boundary-pushing work that refuses to quit.
My name is Amanda Montell. I'm a writer and linguistic scholar. My two books are Word Slut, A Feminist Guide to Taking Back the English Language, and Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism. I write, I podcast, I like animals. That's all.
Well, I'm so excited to sit with you today, Amanda, because you don't know me prior today, but I should tell you, I am possibly the biggest cult enthusiast out there.
Nice.
Not that I'm like, yeah, everyone join a cult, but that I cannot get enough content on cults. I love it so much. It's so, so deeply interesting.
The cult of cults.
Exactly. So I found you because of your work on cults, but then I quickly realized that actually there's a lot more that you've done that's really relatable to this podcast. And that's why I'm so excited to have you with us today, because I want to start by talking about Word Slut and really like the genesis for that book, because I think that's most applicable. And then I would love to dive into Cultish as well as we kind of go throughout your timeline. But let's start with Word Slut. So what was the genesis for this book?
Sure. So I was a linguistics major in college. I didn't know what the field of linguistics was before I got to NYU, but I had always been fascinated by language, by what I would come to learn is this very real field called sociolinguistics, the relationship between how people speak and how they move through the world, how language and sociology intersect, essentially. And I was always interested growing up, just kind of as a layperson and a language curious person, in how the way a person speaks affects the way they move through the world, the way they cultivate an identity, a personality, the way they access spaces, the way they're perceived. Just how a certain, even a word choice or slipping into a different dialect or an entirely different language could affect the way you exist on this earth and how you form relationships and connect with different people or disconnect. And then I got to college and I discovered that there was this small but mighty coalition of fellow nerds like me called linguists who were also interested in everything from what your tongue is doing when you make a rhotic American R sound to how does sexism show up in language, And it was really the gender and language course that I took when I was in college that made this nerdy linguistics stuff feel really urgent and really salient to me. I was like, wow, this language stuff is not just something nerdy that I like to talk about over beers with my friends. Like, oh, the reason why you pronounce your O's like oh is because you're from like the mid-Atlantic, I mean, that stuff is so fun to talk about. But I realized learning about the ways that sexism and just gender performance and gender identity show up in language had these really material consequences. And so when I graduated college, I kind of thought my linguistics major would just be like something cool. I did that one time. I didn't want to pursue academia. My parents are academics. So I was like,
I was
no.
going to ask you, like, have you thought about doing a PhD? Because it seems like your work is it edges toward that ever so slightly.
No, I'm no academic. I'm like a populist sellout. I can't do it. I'm like, no, I don't have, I have the patience for some things, but field research and collecting data meticulously like that is not one of them. I did take one graduate seminar, sociolinguistics seminar at NYU, and I have so much respect for this field. Obviously, I write about it for a general audience, but I was just like, I do not have the focus to like sit down and analyze a spectrogram for hours a day. I cannot.
Yeah.
The paper that I contributed to, I was like 19 and always hungover. Like I had no business in this course, but
I love it. I love how real you are, because that's like most everyone's experience, even when they do a PhD. And but everyone's like, oh no, I'm so smart. Oh no, I am so professional. Meanwhile, everybody's like trying to get through the day.
No, everybody's just trying to get through the day. I'm like, I was up until 2 a.m. drinking 2 buck chuck. I cannot do this. But yeah, the paper that I contributed to sort of in a slapdash way was really cool. I mean, it was about how Ruth Bader Ginsburg's New York accent changed over the course of her career on the Supreme Court. It was like kind of a study about the relationship between certain regional dialects and prestige and that sort of thing. It was cool, but it was too, I couldn't get into the nitty gritty, you know? Sorry, my cat is crying.
It's okay.
He has a lot of thoughts. His name is David.
Yes, podcasts always have so much to say, so we welcome them.
So much to say. Podcasts, love that. Yeah, so no, my parents are research scientists. I come from a long line of academics, so I was like, no, that's dumb. That's for my parents and grandparents. I can't possibly do that. But it's funny because like over the course of my career, my work has gotten like more and more academic. It's just like fate, I guess, or doom. I don't know. But yeah, no, I graduated college and I knew I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a literary writer. I wanted to write nonfiction, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to write about or what a publisher would let me write a book about. Until I, finally signed with a literary agent and I was telling her all of the things that interested me and that I had been writing about and making content about in various ways. And to my sheer delight, she thought that language and gender would be the good subject for a nonfiction book.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah. And, there really aren't too many popular linguistics books, certainly not about this subject. It just seemed like the perfect subject for me to tackle in my first book. And so I basically took everything that I had learned in college. My old gender and language professor snail mailed me a thumb drive full of like every article she'd ever taught in her class. And I combed through them and basically translated this field, or attempted to translate this very robust field of the relationship between gender and language. I synthesized it, I curated it, I, put my spin on it, filtered it through my sort of like youthful, enthusiastic voice so that someone who had never heard of linguistics or didn't realize they had an interest in why we talk the way we do would find it fun and learn a lot and hopefully feel empowered by it.
Yeah, one thing I think about a lot, and your book reminds me of this also, about kind of the reclamation of words and whether or not that is useful. Is that about internalized oppression? Like, what is this about, right? It's all kind of wrapped in this stew. Funny story on that is I, years back, went to a film festival and they had a bar and it was, like a pop-up bar. And it was specifically it was like a, anything goes, gay, lesbian, everybody in kind of bar. And all of the people working at the bar were wearing shirts that said, I see queer people, because it was at the time of Sixth Sense. And it was really funny. I just remember the shirts being so funny. It was right at that time when queer was being reclaimed. So It was like right in that moment. And it makes me think about that a lot. Like, what is the power of, for example, I use the word bitch all the time. I am like, I love the word bitch. It's a multi-purpose word for me, both good and bad. I consider that reclaiming of the word, but I also realize that like it doesn't resonate with others, and actually it's quite painful for some people. So how are you thinking about that balance between reclamation and really what we can think of as internalized oppression?
Sure. Yeah. Reclamation is a tricky subject, and the path to reclaiming certain slurs that have historically been used quite abusively is not linear, and not everybody is going to have the same relationship to certain contentious words. Our relationship to these different words has a lot to do with our relationship to the oppression associated with them. and not everybody is going to agree. So with a word like bitch, and with a lot of gendered insults that reference femininity specifically, because linguists have found that there just are more gendered insults directed at femininity rather than masculinity.
No surprise there.
No surprise there. Reflects our cultural values and fears and stereotypes and such. A lot of these words didn't start out as insults. They started out with neutral or positive meanings. Linguists postulate that the origins of the word bitch are from the Sanskrit word bhagas, which meant genitalia, anyone's genitalia. And over time, it evolved in various ways. It took a lot of twists and turns and ended up as an insult for women. And this is the path that a lot of words take. Really, every word the English language has ever offered to describe or reference femininity has started out with a neutral or positive meaning, and then at some point devolved into an insult, ultimately landing in a sexual slur. And bitch does mean something more sexual, closer to slut or prostitute in British English. But yeah, I mean, my view of it, and this process where a word starts out meaning something positive or neutral and devolves to mean something negative is called pejoration. The opposite is called amelioration, when a word starts out meaning something negative and then evolves to mean something neutral or positive. And we see that process much more with words that reference masculinity. So we can see it with the word stud, which started out with like a totally nondescript meaning and now means sort of like a hot, manly dude. Even the word dude, which references masculinity, has ameliorated over time. So yeah, bitch is one of these words that didn't start out as an insult for women, eventually got there. Now it's sort of in the process of being reclaimed by in-group communities, at least. And we have, certain like Black female hip hop artists to thank for the widespread reclamation of bitch to mean sort of like a strong, independent woman who makes her own money kind of thing. But then again, in all kinds of communities, it is totally still used as a term of abuse to keep women from power. So it's tricky. I mean, for me, the way that I like to think of reclamation is that I don't want anyone policing my language. Like, I want to be able to use all the 4-letter words that I want. I have a foul mouth. I don't want to not use words like bitch and slut. Obviously, my book is called Word Slut. But how I like to think of reclamation is that if we can resist using these gendered terms as slurs, as terms of abuse. Because when we want to insult someone, why are we just automatically referencing their gender when we do it? Why wouldn't we reference the behavior that we dislike? It's actually more effective to be more specific and thus gender neutral when you insult someone. So I could take a cheap shot, and if some woman is annoying me or bothering me in some way, I could be like, she's being such a bitch. Or I could say, she's being a conniving, backstabbing, two-faced sneak. And I think that's actually more powerful because it's more accurate and more specific. And oh, look at that. It's gender neutral. So why would I take the cheap insult when I could take the sophisticated one? But also, I don't want to resist using the word bitch altogether, so I'll only use it in positive context. Me and my bitches, she's such a bad bitch. Like, bitch, what? Like, in these sort of positive or neutral contexts. And then over time, these more positive meanings will hopefully, if enough women do this, eclipse the negative ones so that when the next generation grows up, they'll only hear the word bitch in these contexts. And that's something we've seen with the word queer, which was reclaimed by academia and LGBTQ plus communities. Now, I don't think of queer as a homophobic slur anymore. Some people do. Some people still do, but a word doesn't have to be agreed upon by everyone to be considered reclaimed.
Yeah, I mean, queer, I consider fully reclaimed at this point. Like, I remember a time when it was negatively used because I'm older than you, but that was not even the majority of my life. Like, the majority of my life the word queer has been a positive term, or at minimum in merging toward the positive, kind of, the transition of the reclamation. One thing I also think about with bitch is like, for me, the reclamation around bitch is like, I know it's negative for some people. I know some people will call me a bitch and they will be connoting negative things. And for me, I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing. I am those things. So you better back the fuck up. Like, it's kind of like, I feel like the power of it. I'm like, yeah, I am a mouthy bitch. Like, that's who I am. It's kind of like there is a power in being like, I see what you're doing. And those things that you think are negative are actually not negative. So back off.
Or maybe they don't even exist because we have certain expectations for how women should behave. And
right.
with gendered insults, what people are doing, whether they're calling a woman a bitch or a man a wimp or whatever it is, you're basically critiquing that person for not meeting those gender standards. So,
exactly.
Women are not supposed to be mouthy. Even mouthy, I would file under one of these categories of like tacitly gendered slurs. Like, when do you hear men being called mouthy? Like similar to, when do you hear men being called hysterical, or when do you hear men being called bossy? These aren't, sort of like grammatically gendered words, but they are tacitly coded female.
Right. It's like, we know what you mean. Like,
yeah, it's like that is a dig at my gender performance, or me not meeting your expectations or your standards for my gender or your perception of my gender or whatever. It's funny, like not everybody will agree about these things. I too like some of those tacitly gendered words because I feel very at home in my gender identity. And I mean, maybe this is what you're saying too. It's like, I would love for someone to call me mouthy or spunky. I mean, that's like a tacitly coded female compliment, like spunky. No one ever calls men spunky. It could be like a little bit belittling because there's like, that E
there's
suffix.
There's like a childlike essence to it.
Exactly.
Almost.
That E suffix has a sort of diminutive sound to it. Having moxie, like I sort of like those words just phonetically, like their phonosymbolism really does it for me. I also consider myself sort of cute just because like, that's not me complimenting myself, but like, you know what I'm saying? I'm 5'2". And so like you often like expect smaller beings to be quieter.
And you're like, oh no.
I'm like, no. Yeah, I think my mouthiness and my small size are actually pretty directly connected. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I've started using for how long now? What are we in 2020? So for like seven years, maybe more like 6 years, I've started using power bitch a lot because I'm like, yeah, I want to take that bitch to the next level during the reclamation. I am a fucking power bitch. So back off. And I'm drawn to other women that have that same vibe of kind of like, I see what you're doing. Not only do I see it, I'm going to snatch it and I'm going to turn it on you. That kind of thing.
And it's important for women too, because internalized misogyny is so real. And we grow up hearing bitch used in certain negative contexts, and that reinforces those stereotypes that women are supposed to be docile and not speak up for themselves and such. And so if we can redefine what the word bitch means for ourselves, then maybe we can redefine how women are supposed to move through the world and stick up for themselves, Yeah,
right? Like, yeah, I'm powerful and I'm going to like step into that power unapologetically.
And like have that not be like a weird thing. Have that just be sort of natural and by default. Like by default, we expect men and mask folks to like step into their power and speak loudly and assert themselves. And so they don't get called bitches when they do that, because they're fulfilling our expectations for their gender performance. And then who knows? I mean, maybe one day we'll all decide that we no longer need the term bitch in a positive or a negative sense, because it's no longer exceptional for a woman to portray herself as powerful.
Yeah, it kind of falls away, if you will. I'm glad you're enjoying today's episode so far. Many of you have reached out asking how you can help continue the work we're doing on the Radicals and Revolutionaries Lab podcast. I have great news. We're building a movement for radically authentic, intentional, interconnected feminism, and we want you to join us inside our digital community called Continuum Collective. Go to continuumcollective.org to learn more about how you can join the movement. I would love to go back in time a bit and talk about what makes you you. I know you were born and raised in Baltimore, and you now live in LA, right?
I do. Yeah. And my parents are in California as well. So I'm going back to Baltimore for the first time in a long time very soon at the end of this month. And I'm excited to eat some crab chips. Shout out for East Coasters. Utz crab chips. Delicious delicacy of the East Coast.
That sounds nice. Tell me about your childhood. Were you encouraged to kind of follow your passions and speak your mind, both in writing and kind of verbally? Or that seems to me like a childhood of like that would produce a human like you. That seems to me very confident and kind of like really articulate with their ideas. Or is this something that you had to really kind of work at over and over?
I don't know. I mean, this is a conversation about personality, I guess, now. Some combination of nature and nurture made me this obscure monster that I am today. But yeah, no, I definitely was encouraged to be myself in the home. As I mentioned, my parents are academics. My dad is a neuroscientist. My mom is a developmental biologist. They are extremely career-minded, hardworking, industrious, intelligent people who always encouraged both me and my brother. I have a brother who's a year and a half younger than me, to be extremely independent and to pursue what we loved. But my parents, well, actually, I think my dad is technically an extrovert, but my parents were never hams like me. I'm kind of like an attention, I was about to say attention whore. And it's funny, that word, things like attention whore, drama queen, you don't find masculine equivalents for words like that.
Right.
I realized this. I wrote this whole book, Word Slut, but the hidden sexism in the English language never ceases to surprise me. While I was writing my second book, Cultish, I was looking for a way to describe Jim Jones, the cult leader, as a drama queen. And I was literally I was on powerthesaurus.com looking up masculine synonyms or gender neutral synonyms for drama queen. Couldn't find a single one. They were all feminine. I ended up selecting peacock as my noun of choice.
Oh, that's interesting.
But anyway, that's a total aside. I like attention. No, I was just sort of like the performer of my family. When I was a teenager, I think I thought of myself as a bit of a black sheep. There was nothing that my parents could really do about that. They didn't try to suppress it. I did a lot of like theater as a child. And yeah, I was always a creative kid. So was my brother. So yeah, and my parents were also very busy. So they were like, listen, as long as you're not like completely fucking up, just like go figure it out. So yeah, so I just kind of like followed what I loved. And then I got to college and quickly discovered that I wanted to do writing and linguistics, and didn't know how I was going to use either of those things, but figured it would all work out just fine.
At what point did you scrap the theater and go for the writing? Because that seems a little more like kind of behind the scenes as opposed to like, hello world, here I am.
I think it's because, and this is so funny, like growing up, I always went to art school. I went to performing arts school in middle school and high school. And because my parents always followed their passions and because everybody around me was an artist, I always just thought, okay, like I love doing theater. I guess that's what I'll do for my career. And then I actually started out, I'm starting to hate this about myself less and less as time goes on. It's no longer too soon, but I actually started out as a theater major in college at NYU.
Oh yeah.
Immediately, day one, I was like, oh no, I cannot do this, because it's a whole thing. I mean, I was like, if I want to live the life that I want to lead as an adult, I cannot pursue an acting career, because odds are it's just not going to work out and I'm going to be struggling. And it wasn't as creative as I wanted to be, It turned out. No, it like, at least being in acting school, it was quite cultish, to bring it around. It was quite militant. All your time was taken up. I couldn't study the other things that I wanted to study because your schedule was so rigid. And yeah, no, actually I have this habit of like leaving culty theater programs. Like I also left the theater program of my high school because I thought it was too culty. So yeah, I was just like, I can't do this. Like I can't be an actor, even though like I like to perform and stuff. I just don't think this is for me as an adult. It was great for me as a kid. And so I was like, okay, well, I love to do lots of other creative things. What would I not mind as a job? So yeah, I did a lot of internships. I was in New York City, so I did internships at sort of literary nonprofits. I was like, do I want to be a poet? Oh God, it's a gift to the world that I didn't try to become a poet. I spared us all. But yeah, so I realized I always knew I loved nonfiction, especially growing up on the stories my dad would tell me growing up. My dad spent his teenage years in a cult, which was part of the inspiration for my second book. And he had just had a fascinating childhood in general. So I always loved nonfiction. And so I quickly discovered that I would love to publish nonfiction books. I always loved writing nonfiction. And then I needed a day job. So I decided to pursue journalism. And that's how that kind of all came to pass.
So tell me about the second book. We're jumping ahead a little bit, I realize. We started with Word Slut, but let's jump ahead to cultish because now we're getting into culty stuff and I love culty stuff. So your dad spent his teen years in Synanon. Did I pronounce that correctly? Yeah.
You did.
I have to say, that's a fairly obscure cult because most people, I think, get into cult stuff from like the super sexy ones that are like about drugs and sex and people dying. And like, it's really like super dramatic. But then Synanon sits a little in the background, kind of a little bit more obscure, even though it did get totally
to be
nuts.
fair, the vast majority of cults are obscure. There are like thousands upon thousands of groups that could be considered cults. It's just the really fucked up ones that gain a reputation in the media, and then that reinforces our perception of what a cult even is. I mean, Synanon has all of the elements of a sexy cult. I mean, there were drugs and there was violence and there was sex. It's just, it didn't get as far as Jonestown. I mean, nothing ever did before Jonestown, and nothing has ever gone that far since. So that's a special one. Jonestown and the Manson family murders are really what put cults on the map for most Americans. We think of cults as having been this symbol of fear forever, but really it wasn't until like the 60s and 70s that they became a priority and so widely recognized as something evil. But yeah, Synanon, it started out as this alternative drug rehabilitation facility for so-called dope fiends, hard drug users, and then later grew to accommodate what were called lifestylers, or people who just wanted in on the blossoming countercultural sort of like socialist compound movement of the 60s and 70s. And my dad's dad was one of those people who wanted in on it. He was kind of a hippie. He was a card-carrying communist. He fancied himself quite the intellectual. And so when my dad was 14 in 1969. His dad, who has been dead for like 2 years, so I can talk shit about him all over the internet. That makes me sound like a terrible person, but he was kind of a bad guy. He moved my dad and his new kind of replacement family. He left my dad when he was 3. Anyway, onto this remote socialist compound that was Synanon, where it had a lot of the things that we now recognize as the classic red flags of a cult. It was on this remote commune, and children lived separate from their parents, and at a point everybody had to shave their heads, everybody dressed similar. They followed this charismatic leader named Chuck Diedrich, who at a point broke up married couples and reassigned them new partners.
Classic cult move.
Classic. Every night, everyone in Synanon was required to assemble in these little circles and play what was known as the Synanon game, which were these hour-long rituals where you would basically subject your peers to hours of interpersonal criticism, like vicious criticism. That is what served as the basis for today's troubled teen industry, actually. So it was a pretty fucked up place that after my dad left also turned violent. There was like a rattlesnake fiasco. Chuck Diedrich, the leader, was eventually taken down and arrested. And so he didn't get as far as the Marshall Applewhites or the Nexiums or anything. No, he did get as far as Nexium. But I actually think that Nexium is kind of like the Synanon of today. And I bet you that in 30 years, Nexium will sort of be known as one of these obscure cults because no one died, right?
Yeah.
Like, to my knowledge.
I think of Synanon, Landmark, and Nexium all as this kind of group of the same flavor.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I know people who've done Landmark and they think it's amazing. So don't come at me, people. But I think Landmark is a fucking cult. I went to the intro session and I was like, ding, 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 cult.
It's totally a cult. And when my dad arrived at Synanon, I don't think the word cult was in his mind, again, because it was 1969 and that word was not in the average American's mind.
Yeah, unless also he was a kid, right?
Yeah, he was a kid. But he showed up and he was like, this place is fucking weird. Like, why am I not allowed to go to school on the outside? Why is there such conformism here? Why is everybody like worshiping this guy, Chuck Diedrich, who's just like a normal guy. Like, what is going on? And so he really laid low, and he actually escaped every single day to attend a regular school in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
Which was against the rules, but they made an exception because my dad's dad was such a loyalist and they wanted to keep him around.
Yeah.
So the moment my dad graduated, he got the hell out of Dodge. But yeah.
So you grew up hearing all the stories about this, and then I would imagine this kind of took you by hold, these stories, because I mean, what cult story doesn't? Hello, they're so interesting. And you wrote this book, and I know what I find really important about your work on cults is that you're basically inspecting what is a cult or the language of cults, the way that cults use language to kind of ensnare us. And by cults, I mean anywhere from like Scientology, we're talking Synanon stuff, or all the way to things like Soul Cycle and kind of our average everyday groups that we engage with. It makes me wonder, what is a cult? Sometimes I think feminism is a cult. These fucking people, it's like too intense. Like we use a very specific language sometimes. Like, what is this? And other times I'm like, no, it's not a cult.
Well, I think it's more helpful to think of cultishness as something that imbues spaces that you might not think of as classic cults. Cults fall along a spectrum, according to what I've learned over these past few years. We think of cults as sinister by definition. We think that there's some binary separating cults from everything else, but scholars have actually never been able to come up with a hard and fast list of criteria separating a cult from a religion, from any other kind of tightly bound social group. The word cult has become so sensationalized and so subjective, often used simply to pass judgment or trash groups, religious and otherwise, that the speaker or society at large just doesn't approve of. It's not specific enough, really, to be able to illuminate exactly what dangers are on the table. And it can also be used to divide us, to say, like, they're brainwashed, they're in a cult, they're hopeless, they're stupid, and I'm in the right, I'm rational, I'm skeptical. But really, all of us are under cultish influence to some degree.
I mean, this is something I think is really, you learn pretty quick when you start getting really seriously into this cult stuff, is that actually it's the intelligent people, the people that are seekers, that are smart, that tend to get drawn into cults. It's not like stupid idiots. So it's really important to understand that like any of us could be drawn into a cult, really.
Into a cult from Scientology all the way to Soul Cycle,
Exactly.
This doesn't mean we have to be paranoid, like, oh no, I can't leave my house because, oops, I'm going to like slip and fall into Nexium. It's not that. It's simply to have the awareness of what some of these methods of conversion and conditioning and coercion look and, most importantly, sound like, so that you can sort of check yourself and be like, to what degree do I want to participate in this group that's having this profound effect on me, if I want to participate at all? But you're completely right. I mean, why would a cult even want someone who was intellectually deficient or disturbed? I mean, the most notorious cults of all time have like celebrities in them. They want winners. They want people who are going to bring them money and clout. And they want sort of like bright and privileged folks who are not going to be so desperate or so on the out and out that they're going to realize a week or two in, like, oh shit, I'm not making all the money that they promised I would make, or when I swear to God, like whenever I start to talk about the more controversial aspects of this material, my like body chokes itself. And I'm like, there is some alien who's like trying to silence me.
There's some sort of metaphor in this, some sort of meaning.
Truly. But that person who is really hard up for money, or who doesn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to stick it out, is going to leave right away. Occults want people who are going to have the fortitude and the privilege to be able to stay even for months and years, even when things are going badly, which they inevitably do go badly.
Exactly. It's always there. It always ends in destruction of some sort. One thing that I think about, with this whole is feminism a cult thing, and I think more broadly about our politics, and that we're living through what feels like a particularly kind of illiberal phase of the world, where, there's right things and there's wrong things. And it seems like we've lost the plot around, there's a lot of gray area. The way that people carry themselves and behave and the baggage that we all carry with us seems to be just not allowed as much anymore. And I find it really off-putting. And it's one thing that I've thought a lot about with my own feminist work. Like, what do I want my feminist work to be? Do I want it to be an in and out club, as in like, either you're in or you're out? Or do I want to have something that's a little more in the gray area, a little more in that messy middle where we're all kind of trying to suss it out together? And that's where I sit. I really feel really passionate about sitting in that kind of middle gray, messy bit. But I don't know if you have any reflections on that, if you've noticed this kind of illiberalism as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think just under Protestant capitalist society, we don't like those messy gray areas. We like good, evil binaries. We like elitism. We like knowing who's in and who's out. And we need buzzwords in order to create those dichotomies. And sometimes they can really work for evil and be really counterproductive, even if we've been conditioned to believe that we're a part of the movement that's going to save society, But yeah, I mean, I think the gray areas are everything. And I'm like on this path with my own feminism because especially with social media, things get so heated and so reactive and so simplified to the point where there is no room for nuance. And I think it's interesting because I could not have expected like how many different types of people would read this book, because Wordslet's readership was very self-selective. It was like not just any person off the street is going to pick up a book called Wordslet, A Feminist Guide to Taking Back the English Language. Like the people who pick up that book are sort of like kind of already, by the nature of picking it up, are primed to kind of get it already or be open to it. And cultishness is such a universal fascination in the United States, especially, and such a contentious one that most people who've read the book and who've messaged me about it and reviewed it and stuff are so cool and like really engaged and have been receiving it really, really positively. And then there will be Trumpy kind of people who will be super upset that I didn't talk about like the cult of wokeness, and will be like, oh, this was such a missed opportunity and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm sorry. Did you expect me to talk about literally everything that is cultish in the world? Because that book would be 1,000 bajillion pages long. Like, I wanted to talk about the cult of everything in this book. And just because you wanted to hear about the cult of this or that does not mean that I was responsible for writing about that. Like, it would not have been possible. And the way I'm trying to interpret it is like, if you see certain groups that you are familiar with or that you're affiliated with or that you're aware of in this book that aren't explicitly mentioned, I've done my job, like someone else can write the book on the cult of wokeness. I did not have enough in my word count. Right. I mean, you can't be expected to. Also, I mean, please, I'm not taking criticism from anyone who voted for Trump once, let alone twice. Or who apologizes for those who voted for Trump. I'm just like, I can't. No, I cannot.
No, I don't have any
this
time
whole
for
process
that.
Has been a lesson in not being able to please everyone. I am that tap dancer who just wants everybody to like me and wants everybody to laugh at my jokes and wants everybody to think I'm smart. And with Wordslet, it kind of was that way again, because the readership was just such a kumbaya cult of Wordslet, I guess.
Right. They're like, yes, girl. Yes.
Yeah, totally. And this one has just been whoa. There are a select few people who have really strong dissenting opinions, but I'm just that's cool. What kind of cult leader would I be if I were just no, you must agree with every point? Ugh, I want people to agree with every point so badly, but it's fine if they don't.
Yeah, no, I think you're getting at an important point, though. The point of the book is not only to, elucidate concepts and to talk about specific cults, but it's also to create almost like a framework or a structure in which you can see other groups and you can see notes of it, perhaps in your own life.
I'm talking about cultish language techniques that show up everywhere. I don't need to cover every single group on the planet. It wouldn't be possible. I wish it were, in order for these concepts to apply. But I think, whatever. Like, also, it's been interesting how certain people get mad that like my personal politics come through in my writing. I'm like, who promised you that my personal politics would not come through in my writing?
This whole country needs a lesson on bias. It's like we are all biased. We all have our own point of view. We all have baggage, people.
Like, speaking of cultishness, like, you don't have to agree with everything I say in order for this to be a worthwhile piece of material, And I think this applies to people across the political spectrum. Like, you don't have to agree with absolutely everything someone is saying in order to be able to have a conversation with them. God damn it.
Also, I don't think that having points of disagreement as well as agreement makes that person you're engaging with a bad person, meaning like,
no,
it's not like I have to agree on everything and therefore they're a good person, or I disagree on a few things and therefore they're a bad person. It's like there is gradation here.
Exactly.
And everybody is kind of, I continually have to remind myself this because human life annoys the hell out of me, but I have to remind myself that like everyone is doing the best they fucking can.
It's true.
So,
no, it
like,
is totally
ease up
true.
a little.
Yep. Writing this book, I developed a much stronger sense of empathy for people who wind up in groups, even like QAnon. That doesn't mean I condone them. I absolutely do not. The behavior is incredibly violent and toxic, but I don't immediately write off these people as desperate, stupid, brainwashed, hopeless suckers who deserve the guillotine.
Right.
I'm like, we are in an extremely overwhelming time with the pandemic, with political divisiveness, with such lack of institutional support in this culture, with such an overwhelming number of possibilities for where our lives can go, who we're supposed to be, that of course people are going to be attracted to confident, potentially ill-intentioned leaders promising that they have the answers, or conspiracy theories promising that they have the answers. We're like stupid little mammals, like we confront so much information every single day because of the internet and globalization and all these things. And yet we feel this pressure because we live in the age of information to know everything. And it's like, we need to accept that it is impossible to know everything. And this is actually what my next book is going to be about. But yeah.
No, this actually speaks to a lot of what I struggle with online now is this. There is a push, and I really think this is patriarchy in action. There is a push for someone to be legitimate, to therefore know everything, have the answers to everything, know all, be an expert on every topic. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Like, some people are better at certain things than others, and you should not be expected to be an expert on every topic and to be valid. And you should not be expected to produce content on every fucking topic to be an expert, to be valid as a human. Valid. Like, this is ridiculous.
It's so true. To me, it's so funny. Like, my Instagram followers are amazing. Like, I have the smartest, most empathetic, and really thoughtful Instagram followers. But every so often, I will get a DM where I'm just like, this is the problem. And I remember, like, when there was a lot of news about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict going on, I reposted a few actual experts' thoughts that I sort of co-signed in my Instagram story. This is fucking Instagram. Like, you should not be getting your news or your activism from Instagram in general. But like, whatever. I just, there were a few things that I reposted. And I had one person slide into my DMs telling me how disappointed she was that I had not created content on the conflict yet because it's a feminist issue. And I'm like, if
like,
you're
girl,
looking,
I know my lane. Like,
exactly. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, no, this is the issue. The people who are speaking confidently on every single topic, that is not a sign that you should heed them. That is a red flag. Like, my parents are brilliant, world-renowned scientists who know a whole fuck of a lot about tiny little niche itty bitty thing. My parents are incredibly intelligent and do have well-formulated thoughts on a lot of things, but my parents would never in a million years publicly voice authoritative statements on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and what you should be feeding your kids and whether or not you should medicate yourself and what causes you should support and what shops you should patronize. And yet, do you know who does voice public confident opinions about all of those things? Fucking new age influencers.
Oh my goodness.
Like self-help dudes.
Yes.
Like those are people that I get it. It is incredibly compelling when one singular person claims to have the answers to all of your problems, all the world's most urgent problems, but it is not reasonable. And it is a red flag that person's only interest is clout and money for themselves. And you got to stay away, my friends.
Also, you need to stop expecting others to do the same. Like, I get it. I feel the push to, have a statement, make a claim, have an authoritative call to action on every topic. And
there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure on social media to do so. But this is what gave us greatest hits like the black square. Like, please, let us not have another black fucking square. You know what I mean? Like, Everybody needs to stay in their lane. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't engage in new things or start learning about new things. We just need to be gentler and give more space for people to process shit. Like, again, we confront so much information every day. It is not reasonable to expect someone to come up with a perfectly well formulated PhD thesis on everything that happens in the media. I can't even imagine. I mean, would I stop following, say, I'm trying to think of like a writer that I really respect, like Lindy West, because she didn't come forward about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Like, I never. What?
That
doesn't make sense.
It's like, what if something happens with X, Y, or Z topic that you think they should make a statement on? And like, what if they're sick that day?
What if they're sick that day?
Do they not get a pass?
What if they're taking a break? Like, Instagram is the worst. Like, what? No. What if they're taking a nap? What if they're experiencing nature? What if they're, God forbid, actually doing activism in the world that day?
Right.
What?
Exactly. And the IRL people, IRL. I'll tell you, I do think for a lot of the feminist work that we do, it has become easy for us to put our face out there and live online. But the real work, I think, really does happen in the interpersonal, in the real life interactions with one another. And there are some topics that are just frankly best discussed in person, I feel.
1000%. I mean, the most consequential like activism work that I've done, I haven't talked about publicly, either because it cheapens it or because I'm literally not allowed to, because it's very personal and like it's volunteer work that, that I would not be able to do if I were being public about it.
Right. Exactly. Well, as we near the end of our time, I wanted to ask you about this television.
I'm so glad
adaptation.
We had that venting session, by the way. And I'm actually like quite comforted to talk to like public feminists, outspoken feminists who are coming around in a similar way to me to this idea that like performative activism. I mean, it's hard. Like last year during Black Lives Matter surges, I was totally that person who was like very reactively taking to Instagram just to like shower the public sphere with my support for this movement and stuff. And I don't regret any of that. Like I would do it again, but I think we do need to leave space for like the public activists to be those public activists and for the rest of us to learn from them and take our time.
I think it's the job of the rest of us who are not experts in X, Y, or Z topic. For some topics like, Black Lives Matter being kind of a broad term, for that type of activism, I'll just be blunt. I'm a white person. I'm a white woman. I am not an expert in this area. What I am is I can be a really good support and I can be a really good ally, but I am not the person to be the face of this. I just literally am not an expert enough in this experience and in this topic. So I see it as our job to say, you know what? Boo, I don't know all the answers to this, but I know some people who have answers. So let me point you in the direction of them. And like, let me kind of amplify their voice, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're never going to please everybody. And that's part of activism work too. It's like, you're going to piss off the people that in your mind you're trying to help or trying to support. And you just have to like accept that and like keep going or reevaluate, accept feedback. And like, if we're not allowing people to make mistakes, and then accept feedback, like that's a completely inauthentic world that we're living in.
It's
like
just
what?
not effective either. I'm just kind of like like, where is this getting us? So like eventually everybody will be X'd out. I mean, because let's face it, everybody is fucking annoying and makes mistakes that piss off some of us at some point in time. So in the end, it's just going to be you standing in a room alone.
Yeah. No, actually, I was talking to like a TikTok influencer yesterday from my podcast who was saying how her content has become pretty vapid, she's embarrassed to say, because she's so scared of talking about anything consequential in the wrong way. Yeah.
This is a real thing. I've had actually multiple people. Thank goodness it's a small group of people, but there have been multiple people we've interviewed for this podcast who have later asked to not have their episode go live because they're afraid that something they said. And we of course reassure them, and that, if they say great things, there's nothing wrong with what they said. They're fantastic people doing fantastic work, but they're scared. And we have to honor that. And it's frustrating.
It's so frustrating.
What are we doing? Like this is not effective.
Yeah. It's funny that I'm not more scared. I mean, I am actually plenty scared, but I just have a lot of faith, I guess, in the sorts of folks who engage with my books and the sorts of folks who I assume listen to your podcast. And I find that like smart people have a lot of grace.
Yeah, I think that should be, if we were going to make a t-shirt for this episode, which sometimes I feel like we should for these, it should be smart people give a lot of grace, have a lot of grace, something like this.
Yeah, I tend to think that the smartest people I know have the most grace.
Yeah, exactly. And they offer it to others, I think, and understanding that nuance really matters. So before we end, though, I really want to hear about this word slut being transitioned. Is that the right word? Developing into a television series. What is this? Tell me about what's going on here. It sounds exciting.
Yeah. Oh, this has been in development. Cult of Hollywood buzzwords for like 2 years now. And who knows if it will ever like actually become a TV show on your television or computer or iPhone or whatever brain chip. But yeah, I started working with FX Studios and Pamela Adlon, who's amazing actor, writer, director, on a word slut adaptation, which is like this narrative television show idea about a young language genius who uses her linguistics superpowers to take down powerful villains and accomplish things. And she's one of these TV geniuses that we've never seen before. Yeah, I love her. I hope I get to continue. I hope she like makes it to a television or screen near you one day. But I'm working on that. That's an ongoing thing.
It's exciting. Do you think it's going to come to fruition in the next year or so, or is it we're still in development period?
I hope. I mean, I've written like a lot of versions of the script because my book Word Slut does not naturally lend itself to a narrative television adaptation. It's been tricky to figure out like exactly what it is and what network it would land at, what the audience is. I wrote like a sort of YA version of the show. Then I wrote like a really dark version of the show. And now I'm sort of thinking about a more kind of like whimsical episodic iteration of the show. Ooh. So it's like this ongoing process that I hope ends in an actual series that people will be able to watch. And then I'm also gearing up to start pitching around Cultish as a docu-series. So that's exciting.
Yeah, too. Girl, I would watch that to all hell. You let me know if you need help with Cultish as a docu-series. I am obsessed with cults. So
yeah, I want it to be the sort of like more lighthearted cult docu-series out there, because a lot of them are just like so dark and so sensational. And I want there to be humor in it.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has touched a cult in some way, I say. So, it'll be super interesting. Well, it was so lovely to chat with you. Can you tell everyone where they can find and support your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on the Cult of Instagram at Amanda_Montel. My books, Word Slut and Cultish, are available wherever you buy books, in hardback, Word Sluts in paperback. They're both in ebook and audiobook. And then you can subscribe, please do, to my podcast, Sounds Like a Cult. New episodes every Tuesday.
Radicals and Revolutionaries Lab is a product of Continuum. Find me at Jillian J. Foster on all the socials and Continuum at We Are Continuum. That's W-E, the letter R, Continuum on Twitter, and at Continuum Collective on Instagram. Ashley Tuff is our audio editor, and Molly Shunney is our executive producer. You can find more information about our movement and how you can join at continuumcollective.org. If you're not a Continuum Collective member already, you're missing out on all sorts of perks, like exclusive events, the masterclasses of your dreams, and bragging rights to all your podcast-loving friends to let them know that you're supporting the boundary-pushing work we're doing at Continuum, including this podcast right here. Go to continuumcollective.org to learn more. Last thing, if you enjoy the show, it would help us if you could rate and review the Radicals and Revolutionaries Lab wherever you get your podcasts. This helps new listeners find the show and join our movement for a radically authentic, intentional, and interconnected feminism. I'm Jillian Foster. Until next time, sending you power, love, and solidarity.